I'm going to give you the exercises that are going to train the glutes in order of effectiveness to ensure that they are growing and getting stronger. And this video may surprise you. Let me go through some of the criteria that I'm using to select these exercises. Where does a muscle go in order to be fully lengthened? Where does it go to be fully shortened? And where is the mid-range? Obviously somewhere between the two. So we're going to be biasing mid-range and lengthened range movements in order to train the glutes. As we know, mid to lengthened range movements have a greater potential for muscle hypertrophy. If we think on a continuum, if something's more loadable in the mid to lengthened range, that's going to be more preferable than something that's loadable in a shortened range. And so that's going to be a key variable that will influence our exercise selection. Can we keep the body as a rigid unit throughout the entirety of the exercise, and in so doing allow us to really focus on keeping the pelvis and the rib cage in a position that's going to allow us to perform a movement safely and effectively. With a squat, we can get into a fully lengthened range of the glutes, as our knees are going to be going forwards and our hips are going to be going straight down, and that's going to allow us to get as much depth as we possibly can. However, as you can see, I have a wedge here. Not everyone can get the same amount of depth, and some people may have more of a hingy squat due to them having a lack of ankle mobility, which could be structural, and long femurs, which is certainly structural. And if you're someone like that, which is me, you're going to have a lot of more of a hingy squat, whereby your torso has to come forwards in order to ensure that you are not falling over, essentially. So this is the position that I need to be in order to perform a squat. And that's not great, because in order to fully lengthen the glutes, we want to keep the hips as neutral as possible. So that's why a wedge is very useful. It adjusts your center of mass backwards, and this means that I'm going to be able to keep my torso a lot more upright and be able to sink down into a nice deep position to really target my glutes in the lengthened range. So we've established the range that we want to be in. We've established how we're going to get into that range. I'm going to use a wedge. You might not need to, depending on your femur length and ankle mobility. So the next thing is how we're going to load this movement, and how loadable is it. Putting a bar across your back is going to be a great way to load any movement. It's probably going to be the way that you can most load this movement. Okay, there's only so far you're going to get with a goblet squat. However, with a barbell, I can squat around about 185 kilograms, or exactly 185 kilograms for one rep. So we know it's very, very loadable, and we can get stronger with that movement pattern. So let me go through quick technique pointers for this movement. I usually start standing on the wedge, hinge down, hands on the barbell. So I'm going to do a high bar squat, which means that the bar's going to be resting a lot higher up in my back, and that's going to allow me to exaggerate that vertical torso position, which is going to allow me to work into my glutes and quads more. So getting into high bar position, feet under, pull the bar into my traps, stand up. Then I walk back onto the wedge. At this point, the next criteria that I talked about was a stacked rib cage. Can we keep a stacked rib cage throughout? Can we keep the pelvis neutral? So I'm going to bring the rib cage down, tailbone down, and then from here, I just want the pelvis to go straight down and knees forwards, and then extend up and come into full extension. And there we have it. We've worked the full range of the glutes. This is a movement that we can certainly add a lot more load to as we progressively overload this over the course of your program. And this is going to be my first choice for the exercise that's going to have the greatest impact on you growing your glutes. Now, when we perform an RDL, we have to go into an anterior pelvic tilt. As we go into an anterior pelvic tilt, we're now moving the pelvis away from neutral, which means that we're not working through the full range of the glutes, which is what makes the RDL more of a mid-range exercise. So that's an explanation of the strength curve. Now, in terms of how loadable is it? Very loadable with a bar from the bottom up. However, something that might fatigue is your grip. So I do recommend that you use wrist straps, and I've got a video on that linked below that's going to ensure that your grip is not the first thing to fatigue during this movement, and so that you can really ensure that we're getting the full benefits of loading this exercise. Very cursory overview of this. I'm not going to go into so much depth, but we're going to walk up to the bar so it's just away from the shins, and then I'm going to hinge down to meet it. And as I'm hinging, the knees do not go forwards, the shins stay vertical, and I should feel a stretch in my hamstrings, and I do feel a stretch. Then I'm going to grab the bar. Once I grab the bar, I want to put the shoulders down, but not back, okay? Just down, and that's going to be sufficient enough to engage the lats. Then I want to pull the slack out of the bar, so nice click. Pull this up to like the middle of the shins, and that's going to be a starting position. From here, I'm just going to thrust the hips nice and hard, and then I'm going to lower slowly, bringing the bar back to the middle of the shins before I go again. Now the next thing, stacked rib cage. Want to ensure that at the top, we're not overextending like this. You want to keep the rib cage stacked, pelvis neutral, and just driving the pelvis back. Rib cage stays stacked and up. And something that's really going to help with that is pretending you've got a tennis ball in your chin, and that's going to help keep the integrity of that stacked rib cage and a neutral spine throughout the whole of the movement. Next exercise, I was actually torn over whether to have this second or third, and I'll tell you why I've made it third as I explain the intricacies of this exercise. So we're going to be doing a deficit reverse lunge, which looks like this. Now, the reason why I'm choosing this exercise is because it actually is more of an exercise that fully lengthens the glutes, and maybe even more so than in a squat, because in a squat, toes are typically turned out and the knees go out, which means on the way down, we're not lengthening the outside of the glutes. But with a reverse lunge, that's certainly something that's happening, because the pelvis has to fall slightly into one side in order to lengthen the glute even more. So we're getting a little bit more length in the glutes in this exercise. So why isn't it second? Because it's single leg, it's less stable. That's number one. And number two, dumbbells is going to be a lot less loadable. Like, we can't get too heavy with the dumbbells. And if we were to do a barbell, we've got the stability factor and the setup, which makes it harder. So that's why I'm making this the third choice exercise. However, very good exercise. You're certainly going to feel this. So do include it in your programs to work on the glutes. You want to start with nice tight grip, stood right on top of the plates. The reason why I'm starting with plates is just so we can really ensure that the femur goes right down past the knee and we're getting as much depth in the hips as possible. Here, I want to stack the rib cage, pelvis neutral, and then I'm just going to take a step back and knee goes down, and I'm really, at this point already, I'm pushing into the standing leg to create some stability. Toe catches, knee goes down, try and keep the chest up so that the pelvis is neutral, and then step into it with a nice squeeze at the top. And the squeeze should happen naturally by virtue of you just thrusting your hip forwards before you go again. And this is a demanding exercise. Step in nice and hard. Now, something that's going to be a limiting factor, as always with dumbbells, is going to be grip. So again, video link below that shows you how to use wrist straps so that your grip does not become a limiting factor. Shortened range exercise is next. By shortened range, we basically mean we're not starting in a mid or lengthened range. It's going to be much closer. So the hip starts in a more open position before it moves into a fully extended position. And so the usefulness of shortened range exercises are, they're going to be great in terms of fatigue management. So if you've nailed your squats on one session and maybe your RDLs, then maybe next session we can do something that's loadable. And also, it's going to be useful for those of you who want to feel your glutes. Shortened range, because the resistance is typically in the shortened range, like as you shorten, you're going to really feel some tension on your glutes. What I'm going to do is get myself into position, and here I'm just focused on counter forces So the extent to which my body is able to push into the pads, or my thighs and my feet into the back pads. And also stacked rib cage, very important. That's another reason why I've chosen this exercise. So I'm going to get into position. Thighs are in the pads nice and hard, feet pushed right against the back, rib cage stacked. And then I'm just going to let my hips go back. That's actually what I'm thinking of the most. Keeping the rib cage stacked, and I'm going to thrust my hips down until I get to this position here before I go again. So you'll notice my back is not, I'm not driving the movement with my back. That's just pure lower back, and we want to target the glutes to get us up. And you'll notice from my voice, this is where it's hardest. How can we load this movement? Is it loadable? Yes. Bring a plate to the chest, and then I'm just going to push my thighs in, my feet in, come up to this position here, push hard before I go back down, and then go again and down. And that is how you perform the glutes ham raise, a nice shortened range exercise for the glutes. Next exercise, you might be shocked that this one isn't first, but let's run through the criteria quickly. First thing, are we in a mid to lengthened range with a hip thrust, which is what we're about to do? No, we're not. We're definitely in a shortened range. Next one, how loadable is the exercise? This is actually a very loadable exercise. And so the next thing is, how well can we keep a stacked rib cage throughout the movement? And is that under any pressure at any point? Yes, it is. Typically, we might be able to start with a stack, but as we go into the hip thrust position, with the weight coming down on your pelvis, you're really having to fight to keep that stacked position. And that's the thing that we don't really want to fight to keep. We kind of want that to be something that happens without so much conscious thought. And certainly not the challenge of a bar forcing your hip into the opposite direction from a stack, which means that we're going to be in a position that it's not injurious, but it's not ideal. That being said, this is why this exercise is fourth, but it does have utility. Shortened range exercises are great from fatigue management perspective, and they're also good in getting you to just feel that contraction at the top, which a lot of people like. And if that's something that you want to feel, then definitely include it in your program. So let's get into it. First things first, we want to make sure that the bench is set up nice and sturdy against a squat rack so that it doesn't move, so that we can create as much counter force as possible. Once that's set up, the lower part of my scapula is pushed right into the bench. You don't want the bench to be resting too high up your back or too low down your back. You want yourself to be in a position where literally the scapula is wedged in. Now, once we're there, you want to be in a position where you can feel the bottom of your scapula just being supported by the edge of the bench. Make sure that you've got a pad on the barbell so that this is comfortable. Otherwise, it's going to be a nightmare to load this exercise as this gets heavier and heavier. And then once that's on, roll into position. So until the pad touches the stomach is a good place. Bring your feet into position. So my feet are slightly wider than hip width apart. I'm going to turn my feet into the floor and push my toes away. So creating counter force kind of horizontally as well as vertically. Back, pushing into the bench, chin is down. And then from here, I'm just going to bring or put my hands firmly into the bar and push into the bar. And then I've created as much stability as humanly possible, which means I'm now ready to drive the hips up. Now, as I drive the hips up, it's just the hips going up, looking directly forwards. So you want to think about your nips going towards your hips. So we don't want an arch in the back as we drive the hips up. So watch this. And there I'm in a nice tight position. So rib cage is stacked. I'm looking straight forwards, and then to return it, I'm just thinking break at the pelvis, hips go straight down, and then I go again with a nice big thrust. So that's how you do your barbell hip thrust. That being said, that's all the exercises. If you agree, or in fact mainly disagree with my selection of exercises. I would love to hear from you because it's always useful to have a counter opinion. That being said, thanks for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.